Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the ProLingua Global podcast. My name is Gabriella Ferenzi. I run a language training company called ProLingua Global, and I run this podcast to talk with business people who have had their fair share of intercultural experiences either in the corporate sector or when working for a small or a medium-sized business or as an entrepreneur. These interviews, you will hear them sharing their insights as to how understanding the language and culture of their partners or colleagues or clients has benefited them, their business relationships, and their company. You are now listening to Season 1, Episode 3, where I'm speaking with Norbert Kim, equity trader at One Asset Management, a Japanese company that is one of the largest asset management firms in Asia. Norbert trades Japanese equity and foreign exchange markets and executes Japanese, European, and US equity orders. At present, he also studies to become a Chartered Financial Analyst here in London. Norbert comes from a linguistically and culturally diverse background, which has helped him to embark on an interesting career path in finance that spans from Asia all the way to Europe. He's bilingual, a native Japanese and Hungarian speaker, and he explains how he learned English as a foreign language in Japan as well as in Hungary, and how he feels about accents and being a foreigner in both Japan, Hungary, and in London. It's a fascinating account of what it is like to grow up and to work in an increasingly global and multicultural world. Norbert explains vividly about lots of interesting aspects of the Japanese working culture as opposed to the British one, as well as how working for a Japanese firm in London changes things around and alters even strict cultural rules and expectations a little. He talks about questions that Westerners may find a bit intrusive or even offensive. However, he feels that the answers to them are essential to establish the right sort of hierarchical positions in Japan. We talk about leadership styles, how Norbert and I feel about Japanese, Hungarians, Germans, and Brits being direct or rather indirect. We talk about punctuality, etiquette, and politeness. And Norbert quizzes me on how I would go about if a colleague or a potential business partner took me to a restaurant and I didn't like the food. As it turns out, I would certainly offend the Japanese if I went my way and if I weren't culturally sensitive enough. At the end of our conversation, we talk about the meaning of the word foreigner in London and in Japan. So I hope you will enjoy my interview with Norbert Kim. Norbert, thank you very much for accepting my invitation to be interviewed on the ProLingua Global podcast.
My pleasure.
And first of all, I've introduced you already in the little intro bit of the podcast, but I'd love you to tell the listeners as well who you are and what you do and what your language background is.
Okay. So my name is Norbert Kim, and I think my name kind of summarizes my background slightly. So Kim comes from my Korean heritage because my father is Korean, and Norbert comes from Hungarian. So I'm half Hungarian, half Korean. But I was born and raised in Japan, so I spent most of my life in Japan actually. I grew up in Tokyo. I used to work there as well. So then here I am. I'm in London at this moment.
I never forget that we had a conversation a while ago, and we were talking about globalization or something. And I never forget when you said that, you know, you had a strong argument about why globalization is a good thing. And I never forget when you said, you know, I'm I'm the testament of globalization, and I'm the great example, and I'm the product of it, in fact.
Yeah, I remember that.
So tell us about, so if someone asks you the question, the typical London question, where you are from, what would you then say?
Actually, that's a very good question, because I always find it really difficult to answer that question, to be honest. Because like I said, I lived in Japan for a long time. Probably I would say my first language is Japanese. And also I spent some time in Hungary as well. Now I'm in London. So I would say I'm quite mixed. And, like you just said, I feel like I'm a product of globalization, really. And, I have like Hungarian passport. I never had Japanese passport.
Seriously.
So it's kind of hard to pinpoint where I exactly come from. So what I usually say is what I just told you earlier. It's like I come from Japan, etc., etc. Yeah.
And that's it. I'm wondering if there is really a need to be able to say I'm from one place or the other. I mean, I don't see there is anything particularly wrong, but people want to kind of
categorize.
Got it, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I like that kind of debate, really. Like I used to talk about it a lot with my friends too. But I think, let's say 50 years ago, like people tended to travel much less. So probably back then it made sense to say and claim that, oh, I come from this particular country. But nowadays, like everybody travels around and they get influenced by different cultures as well. So the meaning of nationality is losing its power, I believe, for certain people. So yeah, I mean, to answer your question, what's the meaning of asking that question, right?
Exactly.
I'm not really sure, to be honest. Yeah, it's changing.
I see what you mean, totally. Now, so when it comes to your native languages, so we can say that it's Hungarian. What about Korean?
Yeah, unfortunately, I never had a chance to learn Korean. And that's because I'm the kind of third generation of Korean people who immigrated in Japan a while ago.
Right, okay.
So my father was born in Japan. I was born in Japan. So I never had a chance to learn
Korean.
But I speak Hungarian and Japanese.
And Japanese.
Yeah.
Right, so first of all, growing up in Japan, so the first language we could say that perhaps it's probably Japanese,
yes.
Right? And then on your mother's side, you learned at home the Hungarian side of the story, right?
Yes.
Cool. Okay. Now, and then how comes English into the whole picture?
So when I was a teenager, like around 9 years old, I started learning English through school and also private teacher.
Yeah.
So then, I started learning English and started using it. And also, I mean, it's true, in Japan, it was really difficult to kind of learn English in general, because at school they teach how to write, how to read, and compose sentences and all that. But when it comes to communication skill, you don't really have chances to do that. So I was lucky because I was surrounded by international people in Japan.
Yeah.
So that also helped. And also I traveled around, after I graduated from university. So that also helped. Yeah. So naturally, I just pick it up, kind of.
Really interesting. And then, so was it in Tokyo where you learned, or somewhere else?
Yes, and also, I spent a couple of years in Hungary.
Oh,
so when I was in Hungary, I also had a chance to learn English as well.
Okay. Yeah. So your English is now clearly fantastic. But how? I mean, I'm saying it, and I'm not a native speaker either. But what do you think was the secret to really master the language fluently?
I wouldn't say that I didn't make any efforts, especially when I was in university. I tried to pick up proper English, try to gain more vocabularies, for instance.
Yeah.
So one of the things I did was listen to BBC learningenglish.com, for instance.
Seriously?
So I did that continuously, almost every day, because I had plenty of time back then when I was a student. That's one thing I did. But I think most importantly, I had very good chances to use English, because like I said, I was surrounded by a lot of international people, even though I was in Japan. And luckily, I went to one of the most international universities in Japan. It's called Sophia University.
Yeah.
So I had a good chance to meet non-Japanese people, like Americans or Europeans, for instance. And I also, another secret is that I was dating with non-Japanese person. So we had to speak in English, and that helped a lot.
That helps. That's an advantage indeed. Do you make a conscious effort now that you have reached a certain stage?
Mm-hmm.
Do you still try to learn English, or how do you maintain what you have achieved? Like,
Mm-hmm.
is there a need at all? Because after all, you live in the UK and you work in the UK and you are surrounded by English.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that depends on the attitude in general, really. Because, okay, now you're asking a question regarding English, but even if it's not English, I try to learn vocabularies all the time and try to learn how to express myself better and better. So even if it's Japanese or Hungarian, because I like, for instance, reading, I always try to learn new vocabularies. I don't really feel like it's studying or learning, but I just try to do it like naturally. So I tend to read a lot of books in English, so that helps. And also, now that I'm in a new country, the UK, I noticed that people talk very differently from the way I used to. So I try to pay more attention. If I don't understand any words, I always try to remain curious and ask a lot of questions. So that helps.
What do you think? How do they speak here? Like, did you learn more the American way of speaking, and is that what you mean, or is it something else?
Yeah, that's the main thing.
Because that's what I find as well, that in Hungarian schools, and also when I learned with private tutors, it was more and I actually know that it's the same in Germany as well.
Mm-hmm.
So when we learn, it's mostly the American way of saying things and the American pronunciation. Yeah.
That's interesting because, if you think about geography, the UK is much closer to a country like Hungary, right, compared to America.
True.
So I think this is another example of power of globalization, I think, like coming from the States mainly. But yeah, I mean, it was the same case in Japan as well. Like through Japanese educational system, usually people learn American English. I think there is a reason behind it, a historical reason, obviously. But yeah, to answer your question, yes, I used to learn American English. And then compared to that, I mean, not just the expression itself, but also the accent is different, and vocabularies are different too.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's different from American English, definitely.
And you have to get used to it, certainly. And it's so interesting when you say that you do make the effort to learn and to maintain, but it's not necessarily about the effort, but it's about this natural curiosity. And because you love reading, because you love learning new stuff, it's kind of inevitable that you learn new vocabulary. I always try to, so when I coach clients, I always try to find out what it is that they really like to do. When you reach this state of flow, when it doesn't feel like you are making a conscious effort of sitting down and learning and then having to do the homework or whatever, but what it is that they really enjoy, and they just forget about the fact that it's in German or that it's in Hungarian that they do it. And so for you, it was reading books.
Yeah, that's one thing. And also I like naturally socializing with people. And yeah, I like to have chit-chat like at my office as well, because even though it's a Japanese company, I would say more than half of the employees are actually British. So I'm quite lucky to learn English there, really. So yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about business then. So what do you do here in London?
So currently I'm working at a company called Asset Management One. So we are an asset manager, like managing institutional clients' money as well as some of the individual funds as well. We do trade equity and also fixed income. So these are the main things that we do. And within this organization, my role is trading. So I do execution for the orders.
what language do you need to use on a daily basis? Because I know it's a Japanese company.
Mm-hmm. Well, unfortunately, I have no chance to use Hungarian.
Understandably.
But so I need to use Japanese because my counterparts are sitting in Japan, because that's our headquarter, obviously.
Right.
And but within the UK, we mainly use English. So these two languages.
Clearly. I'm really curious about the different ways and the different business cultures, the way they do business as opposed to the way the Brits do business. So how do you see the whole thing?
I mean, I can't tell you generally because I've been working in the financial field, financial industry.
Of course.
So from that point of view, I think compared to the Western style of conducting business, I think in Japan, banks as well as asset management companies tend to be more conservative. I mean, in a way that they try to, they're really concerned about risks, which is good, especially finance.
Yeah.
But also because of that, it tends to take time to go through processes.
And to make decisions. Yeah.
Yes. One example that I have is, it's called ringi.
Okay.
And what it does is, let's say you want to initiate some deal, and then to do so, you have to get approval from your supervisor or the head of the department, for instance. So it should be usually straightforward if you are working for a non-Japanese company. But when it comes to Japan, in most of the cases, you need to get this ringi process. You need to go through ringi process.
Okay.
So this is basically an approval process. So to get approval, you just don't ask your supervisor. So once you submit this approval sheet, or whatever you would like to call it, it will go through your boss's 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 boss. So there are so many steps that you need to go through. So it might be good to find out risks and be really careful about what you're trying to do as a company, but it kind of slows down the entire process. And that's one big difference, I think, between the Western style and Japanese style.
I'm not sure if it's something in the financial services industry, or whether it might be true in other companies as well, because of the way the company is built and because of this respect and hierarchical system. It really makes me wonder, but it's very interesting.
Now that you mentioned the hierarchy, actually I wanted to kind of slightly touch on that as well today, if you don't mind.
Please.
So this is like another distinctive cultural difference that I see between the UK working environment and Japanese working environment.
Yeah.
So in Japan, hierarchy is really strong and clear. And in the meantime, in the UK, I think it's relatively flat. Of course, you have to respect your supervisor and senior people, but in the UK, I think they're more reachable. In Japan, I just give you an example. At some companies, as far as I understand, let's say there is a key person in a department, and you need to, ask a query. So you need the right person to ask. But let's say you are quite junior, and this person is very senior. In my experience, when it comes to non-Japanese bank, for instance, I could have just, asked him directly, like sending an email or call him up, really, unless he's like a CEO, of course. But when it comes to some of the Japanese companies, you actually need to go through the right person, not this person, but there is a kind of main contact within a team or department. So if you don't take that right step, there is a backlash.
Exactly. Wow.
So you have to be really careful and understand the hierarchy in Japan
in order to be able to reach the right person.
Eventually, because once you contact this main contact person, she or he will escalate it to this person, the senior person. Then he will probably not get back to me, but get back to this main contact person. And then she or he will give me the answer after all.
Like, do you have any personal preference? Like, is this open door policy, or is this more hierarchical system closer to you? I feel that it doesn't really have to be like one is better than the other. I think the way I'm trying to look at these sort of things is that, there is this way and there is that way.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not necessarily better or not better or efficient or least efficient, I don't know, but it's just accepting that, they do it this way, they do it that way. There are advantages and disadvantages, I guess, to both.
Mm-hmm.
But do you have like a personal preference?
I personally prefer the Western style.
Uh-huh.
Because I like to get things done like quickly. I like snap. So because I used to work at a American bank before as well. Let's say the head of the department, very senior person, always kept the door open, and I could actually just talk to him. I was like 23 years old when I just started working back then, and I could reach out to very senior person. That was amazing now that I think of it. So yeah, I prefer the Western style. But actually, my current company, even though it's a Japanese company, we are in London. And like I said, most of the employees are British people. So I think they're quite open. So it's a good mix at my company, I would say.
And also I think that London in general is an interesting mix. And it's a place where different cultures mix with each other, and that happens within the company as well, and in corporate environments as well.
Mm-hmm.
So another example is that in Germany, they are very formal at work, and
mm-hmm.
they do say Mr. and Mrs. whoever, and it's usually not first name. They are not on first name basis, but a German company here in the UK, mostly they would use, first names, even German colleagues with each other.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, once, the mother company, or once a company is placed in another environment, things do change and get more flexible a little.
Yeah, actually, I'm surprised to hear that. I didn't know in Germany they don't use first name at work.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
But actually, now that you mentioned it, I can agree with that, because at my company, it's kind of the same. Like, I don't know if you know it, but in Japan, like not just at work, but wherever you go, usually, unless you're talking to very close friends, you always use last name.
There you go.
And at work, I would say 90% in Japan, people call each other by last name.
Last name, yeah.
However, in our office, it's mixed. Yeah, for instance, I call one of my colleagues who is Japanese by her first name.
Yeah, there you go.
But I always make sure to put san at the end of the person's name.
In order to express respect or why?
Yes, so san means like Mr. or Miss.
Gotcha.
It's kind of unisex, so you can use it for both.
For both.
So I always do that. But it's kind of tricky because if you're speaking to a non-Japanese person in Japanese, then you need to kind of think, because it kind of sounds like it doesn't really sound natural if you put like san to Westerners. That's how people pursue it in Japan, actually. So it's kind of funny because sometimes I put, but probably most of the time when I'm speaking in English to a non-Japanese person, I probably don't put san.
San after the name, yeah.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Well, what do you think about accents?
Oh, yes. There you go. I think it's a big topic, especially in London in general.
It is.
Because, first of all, accent was kind of important at the beginning for me, but not anymore. That's my answer. In London, I think people are trying really hard in general to kind of mimic or get this proper British accent, right? In my opinion, actually, I was listening to one of your podcast records before, I think this person is from Czech Republic.
Indeed, Thomas
Thomas.
Vitorka, yeah.
I actually quite agree on what he was saying before. So he says, so people try to kind of learn the proper accent, but what if you don't speak properly? I agree with that. So I think, first of all, you need to learn grammar properly.
Grammar and vocabulary.
And vocabularies. So, like I said, I like reading, and I always try to learn new vocabularies, but I'm not really making so much effort right now to kind of pick up British accent because it's really hard. So I try to be natural. So that's what I do.
And I totally see where you are coming from, and I agree as well. So I think first, the language has to be right, and then we could potentially polish on the accent, but is there a need really? I'm not sure, because if the point of communication is to get your point across and you get yourself understood, then and accent is not in the way, then I don't see any problem with it. I think it adds color, and I think it adds. It's a nice touch to a language, but that's how I feel about it at the moment.
Yeah. Yes. Of course, like if you have very strong accent per se, if you see that sometimes people are having some difficulties understanding you, probably you should try to make some efforts to alter that.
Very good point.
But it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to talk exactly like local English or British people. As far as you can make yourself understood, I think that's good enough, in my opinion.
Cool. Right. Then another thing. There is this theory that says that language may shape the way we think. And I'm wondering how you feel about this, speaking Japanese and speaking Hungarian and also English. Like, do you ever experience that you think slightly differently when you speak Hungarian or when you speak to Hungarians? Do you notice that they think differently? Maybe it might be connected to the language, maybe it's not. But do you ever see these sort of differences? And
yeah, certainly. So from a linguistic point of view, I think more and more people are aware that language can influence your behavior and attitude or way of thinking, rather. I clearly experienced that many times. And well, I'll give you an example. When it comes to Japanese language, for instance, it can be very formal. Compared to English, for example. So let's say if I'm speaking to a very senior person, I need to pick the right language. Because just like in Hungarian, actually, in Japanese language, you have very polite form, and kind of in between, and also very flat, like very informal form. Probably in Hungary, you only have like two kinds,
exactly.
Right? But in Japanese language, it's really complicated. Really complicated. So I feel like when I speak Japanese, especially to a senior person, I can be really formal, I can be really polite, and that's partially because I'm using these words, but also these words or the language can influence how I behave. Because in Japanese language, you have to, in Japan, you have to kind of bow, or, it's just a different behavior, really. But when it comes to English, I think it's really flat. So, yeah, I feel that, behavior changes.
With different languages and different cultures, of course.
Yes.
Because, language and culture, they go hand in hand. And do you have like a, favorite English phrase or Japanese phrase or Hungarian word, maybe? Is there such a thing?
Let me think. I actually never really thought about it. I don't know. Do you?
I do. I do. Well, there are certain words where I really remember very clearly and vividly
Mm-hmm.
where I heard it from and who I learned it from.
Mm-hmm.
And one of these words is peculiar.
Mm-hmm.
I find it really interesting, and I remember that I learned it first or heard it first from a Spanish friend of ours,
Mm-hmm.
and she pronounced it in a very peculiar way, not the English way, but yeah, that's the first time and I was asking her about the meaning of this word, and she explained, it's something like strange but it's not quite strange, and I still struggle for words in Hungarian or in German,
Mm-hmm.
what could be the right translation, but that's one of those words, maybe not favorite one, but that I really remember where I learned it from.
Uh-huh. Well, I don't know. Actually, are you thinking if I know any, but I don't know. Like, I just can't come up with anything. Sorry.
That's fine, of course. Now, listen. When it comes to culture and etiquette, we talked a lot about the different Japanese, etiquettes and behaviors. But I'm curious if there is anything about, I don't know, eye contact perhaps, or hospitality,
Mm-hmm.
because usually these are the points where things may get a bit tricky. Is there
Mm-hmm.
something particular that you could tell us, or a story maybe that you could share?
In terms of hospitality, I don't know. Maybe like being polite. Can I talk about that?
Of course, please.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay. I actually have a question. So, do you think British people are direct or indirect?
I think British people beat around the bushes and they are indirect.
Okay.
Compared to German or Hungarian.
Right. I think a lot of people told me that too. But in my opinion, actually, they're quite direct.
Wow.
The reason is I know Japanese culture.
Wow.
So I think Hungarian people are probably very direct. And in my opinion, British people kind of stays in middle. And Japanese people are really indirect. So I give you an example, right? So let's say you go to a restaurant and you picked up the restaurant, right? So it's your selection. And then your friend comes from the UK, for instance. And then you ask him, so, do you like this food? How do you like it? He goes like, this restaurant is really nice. It might be a little salty, but yeah, I quite like the atmosphere. So he probably doesn't like it, but he can't say it like directly, right? But when it comes to Hungarian friend, let's say, he might say just, it's not really my taste, period.
Yeah.
But when it comes to Japanese friend, probably he would say, it's really good. Even though, per se, he doesn't like it, probably he doesn't even tell you that he doesn't like it. The reason is, probably, I'm guessing, but probably most likely he would not want to, hurt your feelings.
Hurt your feelings and offend you.
Yes, because, this restaurant is the one I pick. So he might think that if he says something bad, I might feel bad because I picked it. But personally, I would not take it personally, but probably that's what's going to happen in this scenario.
But then the question is, how do you read between the lines? I mean, a restaurant scenario is relatively harmless, but in business that can be tricky.
That's a good one, actually. In Japan, you really need to be good at reading between lines, as you just said. It's like a skill. You naturally kind of tend to pay attention to subtle differences, tone of voice in Japan. So if you live there for a long time, probably you can understand it. But let's say if you're a foreigner going to Japan as an expatriate, probably it's really confusing.
And I guess it would take like half the time to really, well, on one hand, to learn the language itself, and on the other hand, to learn to read between the lines. I mean, that's just a whole different level for a foreigner, of course, to reach.
Yeah, in general, I think in Japan people are not really like direct. So, like I say, it's very subtle, and people don't say things really sometimes. Like there is an expression like this: まああれなので、
Okay, what's
so
that?
so that means like, oh, because of that, and then this sometimes doesn't come out like in the middle of a sentence or middle of a context. It just comes out like from nowhere. So it's almost like in English you say, well, blah blah blah, like it sometimes doesn't have a meaning, but people sometimes say it like, oh, because of that. But what is it like?
But you don't really know what it is.
Yeah.
I see.
So it's just not clear.
Okay, yeah, that gives room for interpretation
Yeah.
in different ways. Wow, really interesting. Now, what about, is there anything around superstition maybe?
Mhm.
Because I'm not sure about Hungary, but I do know China and number 4. Is there something around numbers perhaps in Japanese culture as well, or something else like what it is that you really shouldn't do if you want to, build a good relationship?
Yeah, so you just mentioned numbers. In Japan, they have the same actually. Like number 4 is not a lucky number usually. 2 ways to pronounce number 4 in Japanese actually, like she and also yon. If you say yon, it sounds fine, but if you say she, it could be 4 and also it could be death. People try to kind of avoid that number in general. Or also like anything that can be divided by 2 is not a lucky number either in some context. So let's say you want to kind of congratulate someone who is going to get married. You don't want to give some gifts that can be divided by 2, for instance.
How interesting. Yeah. Are these even or odd numbers? I always mix the 2 up, even or odd. Even is when it can be divided by 2, right?
Yes, even. Yeah.
So no even numbers, when it comes to gifts, for example.
Right. And also, it's not about numbers, but again, this is more like a play of words. But so the other day, I was going to take professional exam, and my supervisor was going to take me out for lunch so that he could kind of encourage me. And then he was saying, shall we eat katsu? So katsu is like a fried, could be pork in general, chicken. So probably katsu curry, right?
Exactly.
So that one. And then the reason why he said that is because katsu has again 2 different meanings. So one is the katsu as in food. The other one is winning, victory.
Seriously? Okay.
Yes. So sometimes, sort of like as a joke, like people try to eat katsu in Japan before you take an exam.
What about time management or being on time? Should I be on time or should I be a bit late? How is it?
I think in the Western culture in general, I don't know, I might be wrong, but I think people are kind of laid back in terms of time. So if you have a meeting, let's say even a salesperson could be late sometimes, and they sort of take it easy. That's what I figured. But from Japanese point of view, let's say it's quite surprising that the salesperson is late, because in Japan that should never happen, because people are super punctual there, and not just in business, like in a personal life, like private scene. If you have an appointment, like let's say meeting with a friend somewhere, people usually go there like 5 minutes before the actual meetup time. So punctuality is essential in Japan.
Leadership and leadership styles, like I'm talking about the corporate environment, of course. Like, is there anything particular that we could mention?
Yeah, I think so.
Because we just talked about who to talk to and how to approach the right person and decision making.
Well, in Japan, if you're a leader, you are sort of expected to take care of subordinates really well, meaning not just teaching them. I mean, teaching is really important in Japan. It's sort of expected in a senior role. So that's one thing. But also, let's say after work, you're kind of expected to take out your, subordinates for drinks, for instance, or take them out for lunch. I mean, it might happen in the Western culture as well, probably, but I think it's more frequent in Japan. And and also in terms of education, it's not just about providing skills. It's also about teaching them manner and attitude, or more general stuff.
It sounds really like mentoring, or so there is a lot more. It sounds like there is a lot more to it than just teaching. It's about mentoring. It's about coaching, or I don't know what else you could call it. Like
I think you just pointed out really well. Yeah, I would use the same word. It's more about mentoring.
Yeah.
And the relationship you could build up in Japan between yourself and also supervisor could be closer, perhaps. Because probably in the Western context, it's more professionalism, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, of course, they could still teach skills and all that, but probably there is more distance, like kind of professional distance in the Western context.
And listen, when it comes to, so back to the language itself, how do you go about, not speaking the language perfectly, and still trying to go for it? And so how do you deal with confidence issues? Because a lot of clients of mine, they learn the language, but when the actual situation arises where they could finally use it in a real life scenario, then there is this sudden, blank sheet and loss of words, and they don't know how to approach this. Clearly, it's a combination of confidence, a bit of shyness, perhaps, or just this fear of not wanting to make a joke out of them. Clearly, it's not the case. But how did you approach this, or how did you break the barrier with English?
Well, actually, like I said before, I was more aware of accents.
Yeah.
So I was scared that I might say things like differently from, let's say, British people, and try to use like more vocabularies and all that. So I had so much pressure like in my head before, but now I try to take it more easy. So just try to be natural and myself, because I believe that as far as I compose a sentence, like understandable sentence, and if I speak clearly, then I could make myself understood. So yeah, now I feel more comfortable, but yes, it used to be a bit more stressful.
Of course, especially at the beginning, but yeah, we've all been there. We've all been there, I guess. Yeah. Now listen, Norbert, before we wrap up, is there anything else that you would like to share with the listeners? Any advice or any story, perhaps?
Okay, so I have another example that I could probably raise now. It's probably again about sort of hospitality, maybe. So let's say if you go for drinking with your colleague or somebody, let's say, not even colleague, like somebody who is, let's say, 2 years younger than you are, for instance.
Right, yeah.
And now the question is, who pays?
So you're asking me now?
Uh-huh.
Here in London? Oh, gosh. I don't know, I would probably... But then 2 years difference is not that much.
Exactly.
It's not that much.
Exactly. So probably it depends, but there is nothing like you have to pay or your friend needs to pay, right?
Exactly.
But in Japan, in most of the cases, it's quite clear.
The older person.
Usually, yes. So I have a colleague, like ex-colleague. He was only like 2 or 3 years older than I am. And then every time we go out, or even out, it was always him who paid. and it was never me. But things like that, like seniority, is really important in Japan. For example, I had a client meeting, like external meeting before, and then I was asked a couple of questions. So the first question was, "Are you married?"
Wow, that's a personal one.
And the second one was, "Do you have a girlfriend?" And the third one was, "How old are you?"
Wow.
I think this last one was actually quite important, especially important because you need to understand who is older and younger in Japanese culture. Because, like I said, depending on the age or seniority, you need to change the way you speak, and you need to change the words you pick.
Of course.
And also the sort of etiquette, right? So if you know suddenly that you are the senior one, then you are supposed to kind of feel responsibility that you take care of the younger.
So interesting. Yeah, I can totally, I feel what it's all about, and I really understand the logic, and there is something admirable about it, I think.
Yeah.
It's a really nice touch.
Yeah, perhaps.
It's a really nice touch.
It's better when you're younger though, because you don't have to pay.
Indeed.
Yeah. And then, like, you know, given that, let's say in the UK, it doesn't really matter. Like, sometimes the younger person pays, sometimes I pay. Like, there is no such a fixed rule. Probably,
exactly.
if you're the manager, then, and if you have like subordinates, sometimes probably they just pay.
They would pay.
A sort of courtesy.
Yeah.
But other than that, I don't see like any fixed rule in Western.
It's pretty flexible here. Yeah. Wow, fascinating. I love these stories. Really interesting.
Other than that, it's a tiny thing.
Yeah.
It's a really tiny thing, but let's say business cards. Do you have business cards?
Yes, I do.
Do you have now?
Yes, I do.
Okay, that's really good. That's good, but what I noticed is that in the Western context, people might not really give it so much thought.
Yeah.
Meaning, so let's say when I met some salespersons, they didn't actually bring business cards. And in Japan, this is big no-no, especially when you are facing clients. You need them to remember who you are, and it starts with business card there.
The business card. That's really interesting because I did notice, when we sat down for this little interview for the podcast, you did hand me your business card, and I'm like, okay, I know who you are, but thank you still. And I had a look, and actually, there was something about it.
Yeah.
I did have a look, and even though I know you, it gives me, it's just a bit you in a different light to me. Yeah.
So accordingly, people really think about like how to exchange business cards. So there are many rules, unspoken rules. So I just kind of, toss it on the table now. But in Japan, you should never do that. So first of all, you need to carry a business card holder. And then you have your business cards there inside always. And then when you give a card to your client, then you need to bow, and then you need to use two hands. And you hold a card and you bow to the client, and in the meantime you receive the business card from the client as well. And once you get that, you always make sure that you put the business card on top of the holder, the card holder, while you are sitting in a meeting room, for example. And then you never actually put it inside the holder until you leave the room.
And do you actually follow these unwritten rules even here in London, doing client meetings perhaps, or?
Never. I mean, not when I face non-Japanese people, because it's not really common to do that, right? You don't bow like when you exchange business cards. And in fact, like I said, some salespeople don't even have a business card during the business meeting. So I think they take it easy. So accordingly, I do the same. But every time I see a Japanese professional, I always make sure to follow Japanese way, because they appreciate it a lot.
Of course.
Because think about it, this is not Japan. this is the UK. And I don't know how you know, perceive, but in Japan, they don't think, and they could never imagine that I would speak Japanese. Because in their eyes, I don't look fully Japanese or Asian. So when I do that, when I follow the etiquette, they get impressed.
They are impressed, of course.
So I always try to do it with Japanese people, even in the UK.
And it's a nice touch, I guess. Yeah.
Yes.
And ultimately, I think that's the purpose of learning a language. That, you know, if you do it for leisure or for business, and maybe you are just starting out, this nice little touch of just being able to say hello and you know, greet the other person, or just say nice to meet you in, you know, in their language. I think that's it takes them by surprise. It may take them by surprise, and it's enough to start the meeting of the right foot, if you like.
Yeah, I think that could be a really good icebreaker.
Indeed. And that's, you know, that just requires some soft skills and really just learning the basics. There is nothing really complicated about it, and it's something that really, you know, it's relatively easy to achieve.
Yeah, true.
Anything else? Some bits and pieces and some more wisdom?
Yes, if you don't mind.
Please. No, I love it.
And
I'm sure the listeners will appreciate as well.
So, in London, how many times do you use a word, foreigner?
Gosh.
Do you use it every day? Or do you hear it every day?
Probably not.
Why is that?
Probably not.
What
And
do you
I think it's because, well, all of us are foreigners in a way. And I don't know, I mean, to be a Londoner means almost that you are, you know, you could be from anywhere in the world.
Right.
So, I don't know, that's how I feel about it. What do you? What's
yes.
your experience?
I'm on the same page. That's how I think as well when it comes to like Londoners.
Yeah.
Because everybody's really like from different countries in London. So what's the point of like pointing out that somebody's coming from this country or that country? Like we are all foreigners, right? So, but when it comes to a country like Japan, it's a different story because it's a big archipelago, right? It's an isolated island, huge island. So relatively speaking, compared to other countries, or especially compared to a city like London, it's more homogeneous. So because of the homogeneity, people like to, naturally people stand out if you are not from Japan. So there is a word called gaijin. So it's slightly derogatory word.
Yeah.
So a bit, how do you say?
Insulting.
But it's commonly used. And there is also another word. Probably nowadays people don't really use it in Japan, but some very senior person might say aome. So aome literally means like blue eyes. So that kind of refers to Westerners.
I see. Yeah.
So probably you don't really hear it nowadays, but people used to say that very openly too.
Yeah.
And this gaijin can be used even in the office. And it was a bit tricky for me because even though I grew up in Japan, because of the nature of the country, which is really homogeneous, first of all, probably they didn't see me as Japanese. And also, I didn't quite feel Japanese either. So when they were referring to, you know, gaijin, foreigners in general, even though they are not talking about me, sort of I was kind of part of it, right? So that was very mixed feeling.
Yeah.
So I didn't know how to place that really. So this gaijin is a big thing in Japan. And I give you a funny example. So when it comes to being gaijin, I mean, I think I was sort of gaijin in Japan.
Yeah.
Anyways, even nowadays, when I go back to Japan for just visiting, let's say I go to a restaurant, right? And then in Japan, you have vending machines to buy some food, actually. So you get a ticket from the vending machine, and then you give it to the counter, and then you get food, right? So when I was going to do that, one of the staffs came over to me, and then started speaking in English because he didn't expect that I would speak English, right? So
Japanese,
he probably thought
that you would speak Japanese.
Japanese.
Yeah.
So he kind of thought I was one of these gaijins.
Yeah.
And it happens a lot. And then I don't know how to react. Like, shall I start speaking in Japanese and then tell him that don't worry, or he makes a lot of efforts, try to communicate in foreign language. So I don't know, like, shall I just remain in English, or it's quite confusing sometimes.
Wow.
But it doesn't really happen in London.
In London, indeed, in this multiculti. Yeah. True. Yeah, the meaning of the word foreigner. Wow.
Yeah.
And how it might change in different places of the world.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Other than that, I might not really have anything at this moment.
Cool.
Yeah.
In that case, we'll do a quick fire. Okay, to finish the conversation, I've got 10 questions for you.
Okay.
Either or, you choose whichever feels closer to you. Okay. London or Tokyo?
London.
Lager or bitter?
Bitter.
Earl Grey or green tea?
Green tea.
That's it. Tea with milk or tea with lemon?
Neither.
Oh, okay. Goulash or beefsteak?
Goulash. Or goulash.
Palinka or sake?
Sake.
Sake, it is. Palinka is a Hungarian spirit. Then football or martial arts?
Martial arts.
Ramen or húsleves?
Ramen.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, húsleves, just to explain to the listeners what it is, would you mind explaining?
So it's another traditional Hungarian soup. Usually it's made out of chicken. So it's a bit similar in that sense to ramen, but I'm sorry, it can't be the ramen.
It can't be. Sauerkraut or kimchi?
Sauerkraut.
Is it? Okay. And when it comes to steak, rare, medium, or well done?
Medium?
Medium it is. Okay. That's my personal favorite as well.
Nice.
Cool. Well, thank you very much, Norbert, for your time.
My
It was
pleasure.
really full of insights and wisdom. Thank you very much for sharing.
Yeah, thank you for your time as well.
Cheers. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Norbert Kim. Thank you very much for tuning into this episode. And if you would like to get in touch with Norbert, you will find his contact details and links in the podcast notes. And finally, a couple of words about the sponsor of this podcast, ProLingua Global. We are a London-based boutique language training company, and we developed a unique 5-step language coaching program that is all about making the language learning process speedy, easy, but also enjoyable and highly effective. And therefore, we feel that it really meets the needs of busy executives and business people. And it is now available in numerous languages. Because what we realize is that with the help of these programs, clients start to communicate more effectively and more productively with foreign colleagues and partners. They feel more confident when speaking in the target language. They are able to follow conversations and talk freely in important situations to them. Plus, they also learn to understand cultural nuances and implications. Natural conversations are at the core of the process, and that makes the whole experience very relaxed, authentic, and lifelike. And that's why we feel that these language coaching programs suit really well for busy business people. Our typical clients work in the financial services industry here in London. Now, ProLingua Global's overall mission is to help strengthen international business and trade relationships and directly contribute to British businesses becoming more successful in the short and long run. You can find out more on www.prolingua.global, as well as on social media. You will find all the direct links below. My name is Gabriella Ferenci, and you can find me personally on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn, and on my personal website. Thank you very much for listening.